Okay, hello everyone. Welcome to SAANYS Connect. This episode is the second in our series on reopening schools with a focus on assessing learning and instructional strategies. My name is Michelle Hebert, Director of Communications here at SAANYS. Now, before we begin, we'll hear a brief word from our sponsor.
Hi, SAANYS. I'm Erin Monaco with Lexia Learning. Lexia is excited to sponsor today's SAANYS Connect. As a former third grade teacher and literacy coach in New York, I understand the importance data plays in understanding students' abilities and meeting their needs. So does Lexia. As students in grades pre-K through 12 work independently in the online activities of Lexia's literacy programs, our patent assessment without testing technology gathers real-time student data without interrupting the flow of instruction to administer a test. With Lexia, data-driven action plans are easy to access and simple to interpret through our educator platform, MyLexia. Teachers and administrators can use this information to plan instruction by showing student progress and who needs help, pinpointing the skills they need help with, and prioritizing students for individual or group instruction. To learn more about how Lexia can support your school's literacy goals, as well, visit lexialearning.com/New York or contact me at emonaco@lexialearning.com.
Okay, thank you, Lexia. I also want to remind viewers about the SAANYS Mentor Coach program. We offer 2 mentor coaching options, one-to-one individual mentoring and group coaching circles. Visit this mentoring page at saanys.org and contact us anytime with questions about how to get started. Okay, so now just a few housekeeping items before we get into our discussion. First, you'll notice that I've already placed you in mute mode. We have a sold out session, so in order to avoid a lot of background noise, I'll ask that you remain in mute mode and we'll use the chat panel for comments and questions. We'll try to get to as many as possible. Second, I would suggest placing your screen view in speaker mode as opposed to gallery view mode. This will place whomever is speaking on the large screen. Lastly, the session is being recorded and will be placed on the SAANYS website, along with the many corresponding resources referenced during this program by our panelists. Just visit saanys.org and you will see SAANYS Connect on the homepage menu bar. Now, I'll turn it over to Karen Bronson, SAANYS Director of Professional Learning.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining our SAANYS Connect panel today. The purpose of these SAANYS Connect conversations is to support you, our school leaders and communities all over New York State by bringing together the combined expertise of guests and SAANYS practitioner members on topics of urgent importance to all of us. I will say that the more panels we host, the more we see this also as a really great place to share resources, to share questions, to share expertise. I was on a webinar a couple of weeks ago that Michael Fullen was hosting on our current environment and challenges, and one of his big points was that collaboration, which was always of such great importance, is now more vital than ever. And he really stressed the importance of sharing not only within your own school districts, but district to district. So I think one thing that we are really finding is helpful to people is the ability to share district to district across New York State from real leaders like you. What are the questions we have? What are some strategies that we can share? And very importantly, what are some resources that we are creating and using to help us through this period of time? So we hope you are benefiting from not just the conversation, but from the resources that are always tagged to the recorded versions. With that, I'd like to thank our panelists for joining us at such a busy time. So please let me welcome Dr. Cindy Gallagher, SAANYS Director of Government Relations, Dr. Paul Fanuelli, currently Executive Principal of Arlington High School and beginning next week, as superintendent at Spakenkill. Congratulations, Paul. Paul is also a member of the NASSP Board of Directors and is a SAANYS past president. Paul Gasparini is principal of Jamesville DeWitt High School. He is a SAANYS 2012 High School Principal of the Year, and Paul is a member of the National Assessment Governing Board. Dr. Alex Marrero, Assistant Superintendent, New Rochelle City School District. And Alex, I always want to call it New Rock City because I'm from Yonkers and that's what we call it down there. So from New Rock City, we have Alex. And Alex was named 2018 Latino Administrator of the Year by the Association of Latino Administrators and Superintendents. And we have Dr. Allison Clark, Principal of Stratford Road Elementary School, Plainview Old Bethpage Central School District. Allison is SAANYS New York State Elementary School Principal of the Year and representing us at the NAESP Principal of the Year. So we have such a wonderful panel today and we have such a large group of listeners. So we hope we can get right to our key question and focus as much as we can and get in as many of your questions as we can. Our key question today is, what has been lost or gained through closure? And how can we assess this? And how will it impact instruction going forward? So I would add that today's conversation is against the backdrop of our top priorities around health, safety, and the overall well-being of our students and our school communities. We will be cycling back to those topics in two upcoming panels in the series that will be on July 9th on supporting student and staff mental health, and July 22nd when we're going to get back to the logistics, the nuts and bolts of health and safety protocols. Hopefully by then we'll have more guidance to work with as we get back to that topic. But today we're on assessing learning and how that will also impact instructional strategies going forward. For the purpose of this panel, we are operating on the assumption that schools will physically reopen in some capacity. However, it's important to note this is an unverified assumption at this point, and our panelists have the same questions that you do while we await further guidance. As always, you have the opportunity to ask questions or share your own examples, so please post questions and comments in the chat bar at any time. I would also welcome and ask our listeners if you have resources that you are using in your districts that you are finding helpful and that you would like to share. Again, this is becoming a really good farmer's market where we share, and you can send those resources to me and we will post them with the other ones tagged for this panel. Our time is limited, but we try to get to as many of your questions as we can. I will be checking the chat bar as we speak, and I will be asking questions from you as we go along. We'll intersperse questions and we will save some time at the end for questions as well. So with that, I would like to start with Cindy and ask her to get us started by filling us in on where things are now with regard to guidance and what we can expect regarding information from the Board of Regents in the upcoming weeks, and whether or not there are any recommendations emerging related to our topic of assessing learning and looking at instructional strategies that the reopening committees might be sending forward. So we'll begin with Cindy.
Well, thanks, Karen. Hi, everyone. It is great to see faces, even though you're in boxes, but it looks great to see some familiar faces. Karen, thanks and congratulations to both you and Michelle. This is a terrific Connect series. And you guys have put together, I mean, the response to these has been wonderful, and it's really in large part due to your organization and Michelle's coordination to make these things go so smoothly. So kudos to both of you. So many of you know the work of Jay Matthews. He is an educator and writer for the Washington Post. He did an article in the June 19th Washington Post. And basically, and it was on reopening, and he basically said this. He said, it's going to be messy, but that may inspire worthy innovation. And I have been fortunate enough to be involved with many conversations with some of you as well as others around the state, and I really believe that. Most of what I have heard has been truly out of the box thinking, sound thinking, and you're doing that, to speak to Karen's question, with little guidance. As we move into this conversation on academics and instruction considerations as we reopen schools, I feel like I've got to put in a dose of reality for a moment. So sorry for the Debbie Downer approach, but you really are doing this without—
What we like about you, Cindy.
but I do it with a smile, I guess. You are doing this without any guidance and without any decision. And let me talk about that a little bit. Across the state, there are, of course, many task forces at the state level with association like ours. In fact, SAANYS has its own focus group on reopening, about 15 people who have been working hard the last month to come out with recommendations, considerations. We want to have that work finished up within this next week and have it be ready for wide dissemination to the governor's office, to state ed, so we can have input prior to their recommendations. Let me speak to those state groups just for a minute so you can get a sense of where they may be. First major one would be state eds, and they've just finished their first regional meeting. We've had 2 members from SAANYS in each of those regional meetings, as well as our executive director, Kevin Casey, has been on each of those meetings. What we're hearing is that that work, that of the 4 regional meetings, should be summarized with possible regulatory action and recommendations at their July 13th meeting. You all can access that. Early in the morning on July 13th, they will give the website for that. It's by Zoom. They will have some portions that are private conversations, but for the most part, it is open to the public to watch. The second major work group is the Governor's Reimagine Advisory Council. And we have 3 members who have been asked to provide input and advisorship to that council. In fact, tonight at 5:30, one of the members of SAANY's focused reopen group, Felicia Thomas-Williams, is going to be presenting to the Governor's Advisory Council from the perspective of a building administrator program leader. And we're thrilled about that. I cannot wait to talk with her probably tomorrow, because she's going to be absolutely dead to the world, I think, after she presents and after they kind of pop questions at her. So I expect that within the next couple of weeks, you're going to see an awful lot of information, hopefully some guidance, hopefully some decisions. I know for most of you, 2 months ago was too late, and I feel that same urgency. We need to know now so that you can plan. However, devoid of all of that guidance, devoid of decision-making, I honestly believe that it really has opened up all of you to really some innovative thinking. As we talk about academic instruction and considerations for the reopening, we're not just talking about academics, it touches everything. It touches assessment, it touches professional development. When we're thinking about that, the one piece that I do want to touch on is I know that whether we go through a traditional report, or a traditional opening, a virtual opening, a hybrid, a staggered time, what I have heard consistently is that will mean some sort of instructional loss. There has to be from our traditional opening, meaning if even the transportation needs, our safety protocols, our health protocols, that's going to take away instructional time. But what do we do with that? And that's when our conversations have been terrific. Some of you are thinking about adding time. Can we add time? Some of you are talking about delimiting your instruction to just super standards. Some of you are thinking about, now I know that we are devoid of state decisions and we're all asking whether we can do that, but the conversations have been inspiring. They really have been. Some states like Texas have actually decided that they are going to give school districts 30 more days. And I can't even really talk about what a calendar looks like. So I'm just going to say add 30 more days to what, I don't know, but to do that kind of option. So I am so looking forward to the ideas that come forth out of this conversation. Our panels are terrific, and I hand it back over to you, Karen.
Thanks a lot. Thanks, Cindy, for the update, and thanks for your hard work on all the committees. And just to kind of pick up on one thing you said, to give you a little sneak preview to our July 9th panel, one of our panelists is Dr. John Kelly, who was the national head of the Association for School Psychologists. He is school psychologist in Comac, Long Island, and he was also recently featured on the Education Town Hall on CNN. And I talked to him this morning, And I told him what our conversation was today, and he said that one thing he'll delve into a little bit next time is how important the start of school is going to be to give students the message that their safety and their well-being and their happiness is your first consideration. So none of what we say today has the backdrop of we're all going to rush into the building on the first day of school and, you know, worry about our instructional priorities. He's going to stress the importance of a transition phase that really allows students to have opportunities to feel supported, to share how they're feeling, to be back in school again before we really get into the instructional nitty-gritty. So all of this is kind of with a grain of salt. We're always going back to the importance of student and staff health, safety, and well-being. So that should be a great segue to our next panel as well. So with that, we're going to go to Paul. And I'm going to ask Paul, given the challenges ahead and the uncertainty and the way districts are going to have to be nimble enough to really adjust as circumstances dictate, because we really don't know what to anticipate over the next school year. How would you describe, especially as you go into your new role as superintendent in Spack-and-Kill, how would you characterize the mindset that you would like your members of your school community to bring to the reopening process? And how can we as school leaders help maintain that mindset and develop it in others?
Well, thank you, Karen. First, I'd like to say thank you for having me on the panel. These panels have been excellent. I feel if I wasn't on the panel, I'd be a participant listening in to some of these answers. But back to your question about mindset, you know, not to be too obvious, but, you know, first, you just have to remain calm. We are in what's called the whitewater right now, you know, the rapids of the stream. And the whitewater is becoming a permanent fixture. You know, it's like it's whitewater every day. Calm waters are hard to come by. So we can't let being in the rapids, you know, cause us to sink. We have to stay calm and navigate the stream as best we can. One thing that is also obvious, but I think we need to say it, is that the only certainty is uncertainty. And that's okay. Like, that's okay. That's just where we are, and that's our reality. We need to understand this dynamic, and we need to let our communities know, you know, that things can and will change. You know, new information and guidance comes out almost daily, like you said. So I think we need to have that expectation that things could change, and our communities need to understand that too. Again, this is okay. We're just used to having more times away from the white water, so we think like it might not be okay. And some of our community members might think that too, because we're used to the calm waters. That being said, another way to kind of frame the mindset for these challenges are Ronald Heifetz talked about two types of challenges. You know, you have technical and adaptive. And technical challenges are easy. They can be solved by experts. They can be solved by people. And they're often solved with current knowledge, what you're currently doing or what you currently know. Adaptive challenges are complex and ambiguous and often unpredictable. So, you know, guess what challenge we have, right? So you need a new way of looking at problems in order to solve adaptive challenges. You know, you need a new mindset. You just can't go with what you used to have. So this is what's going on as we speak. You know, the important piece is that we have to be aware of it, because sometimes we're not conscious to that, and that might get us off task a little bit. And then just to kind of finish up here, this is a growth opportunity. And I heard, you know, Cindy talk about that. We need to use this time to grow and stretch ourselves and to reshape education, right? I think Cindy used the word innovation, you know, and that's where we are. We need to innovate and use some of the things that we're going to do already or will do into the future. Districts come in many sizes, and communities are different from each other. So this makes the adaptive challenge even more difficult, because there's not one answer. So you can't just have one person say, I did this, or one district, and it's going to work. What works in one district might not work in yours. However, and I think this is the point of having this panel, we can learn from each other and we can apply what we think will work in our district from what other people are doing. And, that's probably a perfect segue to get into, learning from what other districts are doing. I just think the important thing is we need to realize it's okay we're in this situation. It's just our reality. And then if we have that mindset, I think we could come up with some good solutions.
Thanks a lot, Paul. And you make a good point, because we know that school leadership can sometimes feel very isolating, and this is the last way we want to feel right now, okay? None of us should be feeling isolated moving into the coming school year. So any way we can connect and share and support one another. And actually, Paul, I think it was you in one of our conversations a couple of weeks ago, you used the term farmer's market, and that kind of stuck in my mind. You kind of shared it is kind of like a farmer's market now. You said not a stone cathedral.
Yeah. So yeah, in the olden days, you have a stone cathedral which can't be changed. It's
Right.
rock. It's there. But every week, if you could have a farmer's market, that's the irony of using that example. But a farmer's market is different. It pops up and it's a different people are there, different ideas flow. So yeah, that's. I'm glad you remembered that.
I did. Thank you. Alex, the mindset that Paul just described has really been in evidence from day one in New Rochelle schools, because New Rochelle, of course, was the early epicenter of the virus here in New York State. And it was easy for us to see that your district got ahead of the curve early and has stayed there in terms of strategic planning. And you've been really generous on sharing that strategic planning with us. Can you tell us how those strategic plans have focused on assessment, instructional strategies, and also to the very connected ideas around equity and technology?
Sure, absolutely. Thank you, Karen, and thank you, Paul, because I think this is going to segue perfectly, and it's going to illustrate the approach that we took over at New Rochelle. As Karen mentioned, very early in this pandemic, New Rochelle was the epicenter. Before the executive order and the mandate, we were forced to close 3 schools in our containment area, in which no one could really enter or exit unless it was extreme circumstances. And although we were, I guess from the outside, perceived to be prepared, without a doubt, it was a reaction. So we were reactive, right? So what we did well was that we brought the right folks to the table, the experts, from our medical director to the curriculum experts to also our operations folks, and we came up with a prep plan, which has been shared in the previous session, and also our initial launch of distance learning. But where we really started to get creative in terms of the opportunity to reflect what works and what doesn't, and to foster change and support all students, was with our launch of Distance Learning Plan 2.0, as we call it. That was also shared previously and will be available for any who would like to see it. It was an attempt, all right? Although I'm a fan of it, and I know a lot of folks are, I'm going to simply say it was an attempt to make sure that our students' needs continually were met in terms of the educational process. However, it was a launch, right? It was taking our brick and mortar reality and making it virtual. Like many of us have done, what we did well was that we packaged it and we communicated and we rolled it out effectively, if I can say so myself. What we're working on now in terms of our strategic planning, as Karen mentioned, is our reentry plan. And Michelle, if you can show the reentry communication, which is, yeah, if you scroll down below, you'll see that we broke up. Many districts and many organizations have task force. We have one massive one, which is our cabinet, led by our superintendent, but is broken down into different committees, subcommittees. The subcommittees are addressing all 3 scenarios, which is what Michelle just scrolled through. But if you can stay right there, Michelle, the 3 scenarios we're planning for: scenario 1, which we have our plan ready, is if we return business as usual. And some may think business as usual means, what's the big deal? Hey, Alex, we're just going to go right back to school. Clearly, that's not the case. Enough has happened that we have to, at least from the onset, be prepared to address the needs of our students. Scenario 1 has been complete. Tomorrow, we're going to submit scenario 2, which is if we continue with our distance learning. And that's where the assessment and the learning that I'm going to get to in a moment has truly happened. Scenario 3 is a scary one, or probably the most likely, which is the variable, the hybrid model, in which we can come back and then exit, possibly return, or staggered schedule. But our approach was to break the folks in the room into more pods of experts: social emotional team, the academics team, the the staff culture and well-being team, the finance and operations team, and the health team, which are really all subcommittees. I lead the academics subcommittee, and that's where the assessment and to your question, Karen, what we've been doing to really break down lessons learned from distance learning 2.0. Michelle, if you can go to either the elementary or the high school chart, not that one, the one next to it, sure. There's one for each grade level. So we also broke up my pod into 3 pods, which would be the elementary group, the middle group, and the high school group. And what we did there is we took our distance learning plan 2.0, a survey that was given to our parents, teachers, and students, but also as the practitioners, what worked well and what were the challenges, and we broke it down into that organizer that you saw. The output has been a true assessment calendar, given the 3 scenarios that I mentioned, with the reprioritization of standards, of course. Lessons learned about our learning platforms that we can take regardless of what next year looks like, right? We were informed about our blended learning and our philosophy behind it as well. In terms of where we are, in terms of culmination, in terms of regions, we learned the hard way in New Rochelle that we can't wait for an executive order, no disrespect to the folks that sit in Albany, not a nice sit in the other office. So we are making our own decisions, and we will mold if we need to. So we're not waiting for a notice whether we're going to administer regents or state exams. We will be administering regents, even if we have to cook them up or use a previous one ourselves. That's allowing us to build our calendar and our scope and sequence, considering the reprioritization. Feedback that isn't as quantitative that I received during this was something that we have all perhaps taken for granted, and I don't want to speak and generalize. Definitely I did, since I've been behind a screen, but also dealing from a strategic standpoint. We all know when our students are having a bad day by simply looking at them and seeing their demeanor. We've lost that in this digital world, right? So that is incorporated into our plans as well. And well, big takeaway that we have is, quite frankly, none of us have to distort our vacation times and plans ever again. If you have a great approach to what you've learned, every snow day has turned into a distance learning day, and there is no excuse any longer, right? So there's so many lessons learned. So we've taken it from an opportunity, to Paul's point, right? Growth mindset, but also instead of being reactive, what can we learn and what can we innovate? But also on the practical, pragmatic approach, what decisions can we make absent of an executive order? Those are some examples, and if there are questions, I can get into the weeds. Thank you, Michelle.
Thanks. Thanks a lot, Alex. We will be stopping for a couple of questions here. One thing that is kind of coming up from several listeners is some confusion around the dates that schools submit their reopening plans. There's a sense that July 15th is the date. Someone else has heard July 31st, but folks are having a hard time finding answer and information on the NYSED or Engage websites. So I'm not sure, maybe Cindy can shed a little light here for us, or any other member of our panel.
Yeah, you know, I can, go ahead, Alex.
Alex.
What I was going to say, I've heard the 13th, recently the 15th. I neglected to mention that we have our internal deadline. So scenario 1, as I mentioned, was last Friday. This Friday is scenario 2, and scenario 3 is July 2nd, which is a week from tomorrow. Not to say that we're going to have it all tailored, but again, absent of clarity, right? We decided to have our internal and mold it. So whatever happens, we'll be prepared. So I recommend that everybody takes that approach because I don't know if the answers are truly out there. Although I do feel that there is a true date of submission. That does exist.
Thank you. Cindy?
Yeah, again, a little bit to that Debbie Downer. So let's be clear, the plan that you're talking about, let's clarify that that's the one that Governor Cuomo ordered as per his executive order. That these plans have to be submitted, and I have not yet seen guidance on where you submit, and I know that you haven't gotten any guidance on the format or any template, but I am in agreement that I have heard mostly July 15th. But again, I have not seen that in writing. I will try while we're on this. We do have some colleagues on the Reimagine Advisory Council. I'll check with them right now, and if I hear anything more, I'll get back to us at the end of this Zoom session.
Thank you. And I would add that, you know, we can continue to check it out, and if we discover something tomorrow, we will tag it clearly labeled to this recorded version. So if we find the link that folks seem to be looking for, the quest to find the link about when school reopening plans are submitted, we will tag it. It may not happen during the course of our actual panel today, but we'll keep looking for it.
Karen,
and we'll tag it to this. Yes.
One of the frustrations I think we have to out in the course of this conversation is the fact that the state ed and the governor's office are not working together on this. I'm also on the New York State Public High School Athletic Association's reopening panel. And we had a last week on June 25th, we had a meeting with, on June 20th, we had a meeting with the first meeting of that committee. There was a representative from the governor's office, his council, and there was also representatives from the New York State Education Department. And it was very clear in the course of that conversation that they were not working together, which is problematic. And I think SAANYS can have a role here, and I know NISFA is looking to have a role to bring those parties together so we can all work together. And I think Alex's point was really well taken, that districts should take the bull by the horns, and New Rochelle's done a great job on that.
Thank you. And there are so many examples of just what Alex was saying that have come up on prior panels of districts really being resourceful and internally making sure they're doing what they need to be doing so that they have time to have the best possible reopening for students, whatever form it takes. So thank you. And once again, opportunities like this go a long way toward that. So this is great. Paul, actually, this is a great time to come over to you and just kind of ask you about your particular considerations at the high school level in Jamesville, DeWitt. And you can even kind of look beyond a little bit. I think, you know, in our conversation the other day, you said something that also stuck with me. You said, you know, COVID is going to end. And it's really good for us to hear that out loud sometimes. And I appreciated hearing it from you. You said COVID is going to end sometime. And how are the steps that we're taking now really going to not only last, but help us get better and better at what we need to do for our students? So feel free to tell us kind of where you are now as a high school principal in Jamesville, DeWitt, and what you see down the road in terms of perhaps real opportunities to make good change for our students.
Well, me saying COVID's going to end, I just want to clarify, I'm not a doctor, and I've never
He's not Dr.
on
Fauci.
TV. I've never, so it's more a hope than anything else, but there are some long-range impacts. One of the things I think that all of the panelists and everybody who's involved in our conversation today feels, and so I'm going to go from the, as Cindy said, the Debbie Downer side to a more hopeful side. The Debbie Downer side is that what we found, and certainly what administrators found and everybody on here, is that we had all the work of school and none of the joy. And teachers saw that, and that impact was on our students, that they had all of the work, everything coming at them, separate from being with their friends and being involved with all the activities that they like, which was problematic, and we saw that. And on top of that, school people had no control over the educational conditions of their students. And what we found is that students really need their teachers, they really need their counselors, they really need their administrators to create an atmosphere daily for them to learn. So I think from the other, it was a tough time to learn that. We always intuited that, but we had an opportunity to see that real, that our kids need the structure the school provides. So the school has to be, going back to some of the things that Alex said, even more mindful about what they're doing on a daily basis for schools. I think one of the things we saw, and some of the questions you talked about asked us to address were diversity, equity. I'm going to go to the equity issue. One of the biggest conversations I had prior to the grad commencement was the huge one that dominated June, but prior to that was grading and grading structures. And I spent a lot of time meeting a lot of my colleagues throughout the state virtually, talking about what their grading regimes would be for their particular schools. And we talked about what the impact of grading is on students, and really led to deeper conversations about the meaning of grades. What we found out throughout this is how tied students and teachers are to those old structures of grades and gradings, of the A+, A-, A, or in our school, we do number grades, so the 90s, the 80s, et cetera, how important that is and how much of a part of the culture that is. And that's something that we have an opportunity right now as we continue this to revisit and rethink how we, I don't want to say assess because that leads into assessment, but really how we rate student learning, which is what grading is. So that's an opportunity for a conversation. And I want to reference the committees, and Cindy referenced this too, is right now, as we know, the Board of Regents has the revisiting graduation requirements and commencement requirements. That movement kind of stopped. Really, they were just starting to get momentum, as we know, in February and March, and then by mid-March, everybody in the state was out of school. And because of the lockdowns and the quarantines, that effort hasn't been lost. And we have to think about that effort hasn't been lost. That's going to restart. And to Alex's point about regents, again, I think that was really important to bring up. We don't know what those assessments are going to look like, but I think we have to begin to think about how they might, taking our cue from the AP. The College Board pivoted very quickly on APs and created the online digital-based, computer-based assessments, computer-based test, however you use the term of art. There is an opportunity, and I would push for this, for the regents maybe to go in that direction now with our high school regents exams. I do think the College Board's going to take this opportunity, and this is more of a hunch than anything else. I know that NAEP is computer-based. That's what I'm on the National Assessment Governing Board, as you referenced. But I think we'll go in that direction too for the APs. Now the APs, this was the first year. It'll be more sophisticated as we go forward. But I think that's an area. So I would say, Karen, that areas to think about as we go forward. Grading is really important. I think that the issue of our commencement standards, that's going to kick back into high gear, and the nature of assessment and testing, the nature of that is going to change given remote learning and given the impetus to go to computer-based testing. So those three things I would point out as a kind of a long-term conversations out of the COVID crisis.
Thank you. And those kinds of examples, once again, will extend, hopefully, into an era where we're not in, the current crisis mode that we are in. Mm-hmm. So thanks for sharing those. Does anybody on our panel want to just stop and comment a minute about how you would envision instructional strategies in classrooms looking or sounding a little different, or maybe a lot different, given the experiences students have had with remote learning and the reality that we're seeing more and more that for many, many students, they really like the remote option. And they miss seeing their friends, and they miss, a lot of social things about school. But how is that going to need to translate to classroom instruction in a more general way?
Karen, I could talk a little bit. I would just say right off the bat, I think we've learned human contact is important, you know, so, so the old method is still important, but we also learn, as you said, a lot of people were successful in, the online platform. So you're really looking at how do you marry the two? I think having it one way or the other isn't necessarily the answer. It's how do you incorporate both into your schooling and into your instruction. I think we've learned that. I think we need the human contact, but I think there's also sometimes when it's not necessary, and we can, for efficiency purposes, or even just some people learn better other ways. So it's how do you combine both?
Absolutely. And oftentimes, those of us who are secondary leaders learn the most or have the most to learn from our elementary colleagues who have been doing things with that, personal piece so firmly in place for so long. And I think this experience has shown us how vitally important that is, how nothing with technology replaces that. So at this point, we're very, very happy, Allison, to kind of bring your perspective as that elementary leader in to tell us about instruction, assessment, and also some of the very proactive things that you and your school district have been doing to anticipate the assessment we're going to need to have in the fall.
Thank you so much, Karen. And first, I just want to say I really do appreciate having this opportunity to learn, reflect, and share with everybody on the panel. And just kind of, I'm trying to scan over at the chat also. We have a wealth of resources, and I think it's through venues like this that we realize, oh my God, I have so many other people that I can tap into. As I was listening to my other co-panelists, Alex, what you were sharing from New Rochelle, I kept saying, yes, we're really thinking about that. And I'm glad you brought that up first about, as I was thinking of this for today, what do we already know? We know that we won't have the time to do what we normally do. We know that we need to have lots of options in place. What could an A, B, or alternate day schedule look like? We know that we can't overassess. We know that we have to decide on what are the most essential pieces of our curriculum. And so those were things I saw built into your plan, Alex. And I could say that at my district, we're all at different phases of these conversations. We have not necessarily tapped that far into exactly the curricular piece for September and forward, but we do know we can't just spend time reviewing. And so how do we move forward? And I was glad to see in your document about the spiraling, because that's something that we know has to happen, and something I was going to talk about today. So what do we need to do? We need to look at our curriculum maps and make those revisions. We need to, and everybody else is talking about the opportunity of and importance of formative assessments. So I think that's really where we look in September, because we just can't, after addressing our social, emotional, and all of that, we can't just begin assessing students more formally in every single subject to see where they are. We just have to teach to that current grade level standards and curriculum and not spend the time to review. We need to make some changes to our curriculum pacing maps and so on. So I wanted to just share with you what we have been doing in Plainville Bethpage the last few weeks of school. And throughout, I guess, our overall district learning plan, first of all, it was really important to us to keep this structured, district aligned curriculum plan for our daily lessons. And this was at the elementary level. And we operated in my school district at a K-4 considered elementary schools. So we actually set lessons week by week to really ensure that, for example, all second graders were going to be exposed and working on those same standards and curriculum. So we have some certainty of that across our district. Each week in literacy, we focused on mini units that alternated between reading and writing. We rotated, our teachers were responsible for that curriculum development and actually putting the slides together for colleagues across the district. And we had our district chairperson help in that lesson planning. the same thing we did with math, where our district chair and math coach helped develop kind of what those weekly lessons looked like. And then those in literacy and math were developed into these slides and available to parents on our district website, but then teachers took them and personalized them. So we could balance both synchronous and asynchronous learning. So they embedded videos into those slides and also had live meet sessions at the same time. One of the things that was really critical to us was to get a sense of where our children were within their reading. And we used typical benchmark levels, but we knew we couldn't benchmark students like we normally do in person. So we came up with a plan, and really as we presented this out with our teachers, and I have to say this was to begin at the beginning of at the start of June, our teachers were really kind of getting towards the end of all of this intense work. And here we were asking them to provide reading assessments. So we called them research conferences, and they were one-to-one research conferences that would start in June. And we gave our reasoning for this. And I'll share on the screen for a moment, but we told our teachers this was going to inform them for grading trimester 3. It was going to help them set goals and give goals individually to children for summer reading. It was going to help the teacher practice virtual assessments with children that they already knew for the whole school year. And it will give our teachers in September, the new classroom teachers, just some new information. And we really wanted to honor and recognize the incredible work that our teachers were doing since March. And by seeing that children really did not fall back or regress so much. So that was the information. So we needed to provide this reasoning to help our teachers as they were feeling a little bit of frustration. So I'm just going to pull up a couple of documents that I combined. So this was my general memo. I adapted it a little bit to present to you of our June reading research conferences. And again, this could be posted and I can share this publicly. I just want to highlight that we said this was not an official benchmark, but it was to just capture what children were doing right now. So we gave our teachers the reasoning behind this. We asked them that they gave one-to-one time with each student for approximately, we estimated about 10 to 15 minutes. We gave them a model schedule that they could use to schedule these. We informed parents that we would be doing this. And then we gave them, and they said, as we started to talk about this, could you please provide us with all of the information we need? And we did. We had an extensive link of information. And if this document is a live document, you would have access to that. So we created these reading record forms for our teachers to use. They're being stored in our Google Drive, a little different depending on the grade level. This way I can now resort it for our teachers in September. We gave them just a lot of tips and resources for them. We gave them the PDF versions of texts that they should use. They were to start at the current reading level that children were. We gave them some models, and I'm actually going to just scroll down. Once they clicked on a link, they were able to, we gave them again some philosophy behind this. And then over here, and I know if I click on these now, I don't want to mess up what's on my screen. We created reading record forms depending on the level. We gave them access to the online texts that they should use, so everybody would use the same level K. And then we also had some exemplars of what it would look like to assess online using their Google Meet one-to-one. One of our principals did it with her daughter, and we also had a staff developer model it with a student. So we were able to, over the last few weeks, practice what online assessment could look like very simply. And I think that when we go back into September, we don't know what it's going to look like. And if we have to continue with that virtual type of assessment, our teachers will feel one step a little bit more comfortable, not only our teachers, but our students at the elementary level, because they experienced this. So that's what we learned and did.
Okay, thank you, Allison. And is there anything that you and your school learned in the process of doing this that you would share with our group in case they want to do a similar kind of capture?
I would definitely say that when we started to have this conversation with the teachers, there was a lot of anxiety. Yep. And what they just kept saying, I know when I was having grade level meetings, if you could just please provide the resources, please give us the text. I can't look, I'm not sure what to use. I'm not sure how to, the challenges that I'll have showing the text on the screen with the students. So we heard what they said, and we turned to our literacy chair and said, could you please, you know, cull the resources? And immediately we began to work on this. And within 24 hours, we had resources for the teachers, common recording sheets, video exemplars. And I think once the teachers completed their first or second, they felt relieved, they knew how to do it, and they actually were so appreciative and of having that opportunity to actually meet one-to-one with their children, and that it did inform them. And I think I still need to study the data that we have, but we really either said students stayed on grade level, and some of them even have grown, but we didn't see anybody who's regressed.
Thank you. At this point, we'd like to give some of our listeners opportunities to ask questions, and Michelle is ready to unmute you so that you can articulate your question if you have one. Maybe we can begin with Amanda. Amanda has a question. Would you like to come on and ask it?
Yeah, you can, participants can now unmute themselves. Just please remute when you're completed your question.
Okay.
Hello, thanks for including me. I'm from Hudson City School District at the elementary level. I love your idea and just how you provided all of the resources to your teachers. I am just wondering about the students who struggled to engage or the parents who struggled to get the students on. How did you move forward with that type of assessment or that type of engagement? What were the solutions?
So I appreciate the question. We did have that concern. And one of the things that we did was to try to be proactive and notify the parents beforehand. So we sent a letter out to them. And again, any of these resources, I'm certainly happy to share. So we just let them know our intent and what that would look like. And the guidance that I gave to my teachers is set up these appointments, these one-to-one appointments on your calendar, notify the parent. And if they don't show up, try and reach out to them again, and maybe try 2 or 3 times. And if you just can't, if they're not getting in and engaging, not to worry about it, because again, we didn't want to make everybody crazy with this. And I have to say that I did not get anything from teachers that were surprising to me about, we had so much engagement. I'm not saying everybody, but that was the sense of just being proactive. And when you notify the parents, they actually really appreciated being able to, from afar, see what the process of assessment was like, and made comments and talked with some of the some of the parents talked to the teachers afterwards. So it was a really good learning process for parents also to better understand that. So I would say that you need to notify your community what you're doing, and really just try to reach out as much as you can.
Thank you. Paul?
Yeah, one of the things that we did, we asked our teachers to keep track of the students who were turning in assignments, who were coming to their Zoom meetings, et cetera. And we kept a spreadsheet of all of the students in our high school. We have 920 students here. And if a student hadn't been showing up, or if a teacher was concerned, they'd put that on a shared spreadsheet, a shared document, and our counselors would make certain they touch base. We even went to a point where our assistant principals, working with TAs, would have virtual study halls with students who got behind in their work. They'd literally call them, they'd have that virtual thing one-on-one, and they're watching them work. One of the things that we found, and were articles to support this, is that people need people in order to be more effective in their work. That it's very difficult, especially for young people, to work individually and to work on stuff that they are, quote unquote, learning individually. So we tried to make those human connections, much like Allison did, as much as possible at the secondary level.
Thank you. Cindy?
Actually, I would prefer to go to Alex, to our experts on instruction, and then I'll just pick up one piece about attendance.
Okay.
Thank you, Cindy. I'll be brief. So not so much around assessment in terms of lack of engagement. In our distance learning plan, you'll see that after 3 days of non-engagement, first of all, we made the decision locally that we were not going to mark students present or absent. However, we did use, similar to what Paul just mentioned, our own shared Google Drive grade level, right? So we have 11,000 students, so we needed to use the infrastructure that we had, which was eSchools. So we were able to change eSchools to represent an E for engaged and nothing if they weren't engaged. 3 nothings meant that there was 3 days of a student not being engaged, and we got our service providers, guidance counselors, psychologists, and the threat was that we're gonna come visit you. We can't visit anybody during these days, right? So no visits were made, but that engagement happened, and if it was a Chromebook or an access issue, we provided that. And those students, even if they were not engaged or if they were regressing in their work, no one failed. Everybody who was in that situation received the incomplete and have been identified for our virtual summer school that begins on the 6th.
Thank you.
And so both of those comments between Alex and Paul raised my thinking in terms of, as whatever we see happens in the fall, it becomes more permanent than the transitional just shutting down. So do your attendance policies and do your grading policies. Are they the ones you want to carry forth through the fall? I think we should really begin to think, if you haven't already, is how those attendance policies, how are you going to track maybe differently or more consistently the attendance of whether it's remote or in person.
Thank you. I'm going to ask Bill Allen to ask his question of the panel. Bill? I will ask Bill's question. I think it's an excellent question. Bill said, has anyone involved the students in the creative process? If so, did it go well? Does anyone, and how do you plan to involve students in the process going forward? Alex?
Yes, so I have 20 members in my subcommittee, so multiply that by 5, we have 100 folks who are the voices who are feeding the information from all different stakeholders. Those are leaders, those are teachers, those are parents/teachers, a lot of those in my committee who also teach and live in the district, and community members. What was missing initially were the students. So since we had 20, what I decided to do, which is killing my schedule and availability, is to have another pod of student leaders, student leadership ranging from grades 6 to 8, who I meet as a satellite and feed into what I bring to the discussion for the group of 20. So initially they were going to be part of it, since the conversation was a bit candid, right? And also it's difficult to control a crowd of 20 virtually. So I am sacrificing my time, I hate to say it that way, right? But a pod of students who are an annex to my group of 20, and they are very much involved in the reentry plan.
Thank you. Bill said his mic wasn't working, but thank you, Bill, for a great question. Allison, want to comment?
Yes, actually, so on our, I can't remember if it's our regular district or our subcommittee on instruction, we do have 2 student representatives, one at the high school level and one from the middle school level. So their voice is on the committee. And then with respect to, we recently, about 2 weeks ago, put out surveys to all of our different constituency groups. So to staff, parents, admin, and we also surveyed our 5 through 12 students. And we basically worked off of the same questions and about the reopening plan, even just thinking of how we would schedule, like we're at that level, but we had the voice of students throughout those surveys.
Thank you. And Allison, a question came up that I think is in your ballpark, so I'll just ask it quickly. Did you use any specific resources to assess for elementary math?
We only used our Go Math program.
Gotcha.
And it wasn't just, we didn't assess, so to speak.
Thank you. A question came up about PD for teachers. Paul, maybe kind of moving into that superintendency, any thoughts about how all of us as school leaders in many different roles can help our teachers in what they need to learn so that they can support our students' learning?
Yeah, that's a good question about the PD. It's very important to have. So we, at Spack and Kill, there's tech leaders, and they were able to put together, PD for the teachers, and it's just very important. And it also has to be internal, again, sometimes, because different districts need different things. So if you have that expert within your district on certain types of, what your platforms are, Google's been has been very important for a lot of districts. It's important to utilize, the people you have in-house to get the word out, and to have some sort of PD for teachers.
Thank you. There's also great suggestions coming up in our chat bar from folks who are at BOCES around the state in terms of other ways we can support teacher PD in this process. Before we start to wrap up for today, I just want to once again thank the members of our panel for a terrific discussion, a rich discussion with so much in there that we appreciate, so many good things that we can take away and that we can use. And I also want to thank our listeners for tuning in today and let you know that 2 great panels are coming up. July 9th, Student Mental Health and Wellbeing, July 22nd, back to all more logistical issues. I just see a comment from Virginia Bond. Virginia is reminding us that NiceGate, one of our really excellent partners, NiceGate is providing PD throughout the summer for free and has wonderful options up on their website that we hope you can check out. So I want to thank Allison and Paul and Alex and Paul and Cindy. And we will see you again on a future panel. But before we tune off today, there are just a couple more resources that we want to share. Michelle, maybe you can pull those up. Thanks a lot. This is one that I think is particularly pertinent. This was shared with me by NASSP by way of the Collaborative for Student Success. They surveyed 5,000 school leaders around our country in April. And they asked them, what do you see as priorities when we get to the topic of helping students, quote, catch up? And I put that in quotes, right? Because in the environment that we're in, it's not like catching up when you've missed 3 days because, you know, you have had the chicken pox or something. This is big, right? So we kind of put catch up in quotes, but I would just call your attention to this survey. The Collaborative for Student Success listed 4 different options, 4 different ways that schools can go with kind of assessing and helping students, quote, catch up. So this is something that I would have found particularly useful if I was in a school right now. And then there was an article. Michelle, you can put it up there if you like. This is just one of the many EdWeek articles that I find very helpful, that I always want to share these kinds of very concrete, helpful things. 6 classroom changes teachers can make when schools reopen. These are things we can share with our teachers. These are simple, I want to stress simple, low resource, high impact moves that teachers can make in their classrooms when schools reopen that will really support students. So once again, we will be rich with resources on our topic. We will look forward to seeing you at our future panels coming up. And, you know, also I'm going to make one request of everyone. I know that some of you who have been listening today, we've really kind of developed a following, and many of you have been to a couple of SAANYS Connect panels right now, or as of now. We really want to hear feedback from you. So I would really ask that you send me an email, kbronson@saanys.org. My information is up there, of course, on the website and everywhere else. And just share some thoughts about the SAANYS Connect panels that can certainly include suggestions for future topics or any other ideas you may have about how we can continue to make this better and better and more useful for you. And so with that, we would just encourage you to keep on connecting with us and with one another. And once again, thank you so much to our panel and to our listeners and to Michelle. Thank you for bringing this all together for us. And to Susan Juronsky, always watch for Susan Juronsky's emails because they have those great links to these good things. So make sure you never miss any of those. So thank you, everyone, and have a wonderful evening. We hope you found this helpful today. Take care.